My daughter forgot to hang up the phone. I heard her say 5 words that changed everything. He won't even notice. I didn't say a word back. 3 months later, she and her husband came home from a cruise, smiling right up until their key wouldn't turn in the lock. Taped to the door was an envelope with her name on it. When she opened it, she dropped to her knees on the porch. My name is Walter Briggs. I'm 68 years old. For 36 years, I ran a small hardware store in Millbrook, Ohio, mixing paint and cutting keys for anybody who walked through my door. I raised one daughter in the house on Cedar Hollow Road, buried my wife from that house, and figured I'd die peacefully in that house too. My daughter had other plans. This is the story of how I found out, and what I did before she ever got the chance. My wife Loretta passed away 3 years ago on a quiet Sunday morning, right there in the recliner by the front window where she liked to watch the birds at the feeder. After the funeral, the house on Cedar Hollow felt too big and too still for one old man rattling around it alone. I'd still set 2 coffee cups out some mornings before I remembered. My daughter Renee called me every Wednesday night, regular as a church bell, and about 8 months after Loretta died, she showed up at my door with her husband Douglas and an idea that sounded, at the time, like the kindest thing anybody had said to me in years. "Dad, you shouldn't be out here by yourself," she said, standing in my kitchen with her coat still on. "Doug and I were talking. What if we moved in for a while? Keep you company, help with the bills, save up while our house in Springfield sells?" I said yes before she'd even finished asking. Relief washes over you at a certain age when somebody offers to fill the silence. Within a month, they'd packed up their rental and moved into the 2 bedrooms upstairs, the ones Loretta and I had once hoped would belong to grandkids someday. For the first stretch, it really did feel like a gift. Renee cooked most nights, meatloaf and green beans just like her mother used to make. Douglas fixed the loose porch step and cleaned the gutters without me asking twice. We watched the Reds play on Sundays the way Renee and I used to when she was a girl in pigtails, asking me to explain the infield fly rule. For the first time since Loretta passed, the house had noise in it again, and I told my neighbor Ellis across the road that I was the luckiest father in 3 counties, having my own daughter look after me like that. I had no idea, not the faintest notion, that the woman smiling across my dinner table every night was already counting the months until this house belonged to somebody else, and that somebody wasn't going to be me. By the 5th month, small things started shifting. The kind of things a man talks himself out of noticing because he doesn't want to believe what they might mean. Renee started saying "our house" on the phone with her sister-in-law instead of Dad's place. She swapped out the curtains Loretta had sewn herself, said the fabric was getting brittle and letting in too much sun. Douglas started asking more about my finances, my pension from the store, whether the mortgage was paid off, which it had been since 2011, free and clear. A father tells himself his own child asking these things is only natural, only sensible. One night over pot roast, Douglas mentioned an old coworker of his had just sold his late mother's farmhouse, out past Xenia, for close to $780,000. "Land values out this way are getting silly," he said, looking around my kitchen in a way that put a chill behind my ears I couldn't explain at the time. Renee started having a realtor friend over for coffee on Tuesday afternoons, a woman named Cheryl, who I later learned had already walked my property with a clipboard while I was at the pharmacy, quietly pricing out what my 3 acres in the old barn might bring. Looking back now, I can lay it all out clean as a blueprint. Back then, I only saw a daughter and son-in-law settling into a routine, and a lonely old man grateful for the company. I want you to hold on to that feeling with me, that trust, because it's exactly that trust that made what came later cut so deep once I finally understood what was happening under my own roof. About 7 months in, Renee started saying things like, "Dad, you've been repeating yourself lately, even on days I hadn't repeated a single word." I misplaced my truck keys one Saturday morning, same as I had 100 times in 40 years, and by supper, Renee was telling Douglas across the table, like I wasn't sitting 3 feet from them, that she was starting to worry about my memory. I laughed it off. Told her everybody loses their keys now and then. She didn't laugh back. She started insisting on driving me to my checkups, even though I'd driven myself to that same clinic for 2 decades without so much as a fender bender. And she'd sit in the exam room asking Dr. Okafor pointed questions about forgetfulness and early warning signs. Questions I never asked and didn't need answered. Douglas started leaving brochures on the kitchen table, the glossy kind with soft lighting and smiling, silver-haired folks playing checkers on the cover. Brochures for places with names like Whispering Oaks and Cedar Manor. When I asked Renee about them, she said, "Sweet as pie. Oh, those are just for down the line, Dad, in case we ever need options. Down the line. That's the exact phrase she used. I didn't push back. I didn't want to be the suspicious old fool accusing his own daughter over a stack of pamphlets. So I stayed quiet, kept my face easy, kept thanking them for thinking ahead, while some part of me, the part that spent 36 years reading customers who lied about what really broke their lawnmowers, started paying very close attention to every word coming out of my daughter's mouth. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I'd gone out to the tool shed hunting for a torque wrench I hadn't touched in years, puttering the way old men do when the house feels too quiet. When I heard Renee's voice drifting from the back porch through the window, I'd left, cracked. She was on the phone, talking low and quick, in a way that told me she figured she was alone on the property. No, listen. She was saying the doctor already noted memory concerns in his chart. That's documented now. That's the piece we needed. Once we get him settled at Cedar Manor, the guardianship paperwork basically files itself. A pause, then. We are not talking about kicking him out. Doug's mom went through the same thing. It's about him getting care he can't get with us working full time. I stood frozen by that shed door with a torque wrench in my hand, my heart thumping loud enough I was sure she'd hear it through the screen. She kept talking. Cheryl already ran the comps. With the market the way it's moving right now, we're looking at right around 780, maybe more if we list before winter. That covers his care for years and leaves plenty for us to finally get our own place. Somebody must have said something on the other end because Renee laughed, actually laughed, and said, "He won't even notice, honestly." It's not cruel. It's just what makes sense for everybody at this point. He won't even notice. 5 words. I stood behind that shed for what felt like an hour but was probably 90 seconds, and I did not make one sound. I set the torque wrench down as careful as I'd picked it up, walked back through the yard, and sat down on the porch swing in the October sun, like nothing on this earth had just shifted under my feet, even though everything had. I want to be honest with you about something. My first instinct behind that shed was to march onto that porch and ask my own daughter what kind of woman says her father won't even notice being shipped off, like I was an old riding mower nobody wanted in the garage anymore. But I didn't do it. 36 years running a hardware store teaches you something valuable, and it has nothing to do with plumbing fixtures. It teaches you how to keep your face steady when somebody's lying to you, so you can figure out exactly what they're planning before you say one single word. So that night at supper, I ate Renee's meatloaf and asked Douglas how the warehouse job was treating him, same as any other Tuesday. I didn't bring up the phone call. I didn't mention Cedar Manor or the $780,000 or the fact that my own daughter had just described getting rid of me the same way you'd describe hauling off a busted appliance. That night I lay awake in the dark, and I did not sleep, not 1 minute. I went back over every sweet little comment Renee had made about those brochures, every appointment Douglas had suddenly started attending, every question about my pension and my mortgage and whether the deed was clear. It all lined up now, every last piece, like a jigsaw puzzle I'd been too trusting to see the shape of. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, lying in the house I'd owned since 1988, the house where I'd taught that same daughter to ride a bike down the gravel drive, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to point fingers at anybody. I was simply going to find out exactly where I stood, legally, before they got the chance to make a move against me. The following Thursday, I told Renee I had a follow-up at the clinic across town, and I drove myself there in my own truck, the same 2009 Chevy I'd babied for 15 years. Instead of the clinic, I drove to see a lawyer named Priscilla Voss, whose office sat above a bakery on Fountain Avenue, a name a longtime customer at the store had given me years back for exactly this kind of trouble. I sat across from her desk and told her everything. The phone call, the brochures, the questions about my finances, laid it all out plain as I could manage. Priscilla listened without cutting in once, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. And when I finished, she pulled the county records up right there on her monitor. "Mr. Briggs," she said, "I need you to hear this clearly. This property is deeded solely in your name, just yours. Nobody else is on that title, and unless you've signed a power of attorney or some similar document, nobody, and I mean nobody, can sell this house, place you in a facility, or touch $1 of your money without your say-so." Then she asked me a question that dropped my stomach clean through the floor. "Has your daughter asked you to sign anything lately? Anything she called insurance paperwork or a medical form, something along those lines?" And it hit me instantly. A stack of papers Douglas had left on the kitchen counter about 3 weeks back. telling me they were just updated homeowners insurance documents that needed my signature for their files. I hadn't signed them yet, kept telling myself I'd get to it, kept putting it off because I don't sign a blessed thing without my reading glasses and a clear head first thing in the morning. Priscilla told me to bring those papers straight in, and when I did, 2 days later, she confirmed exactly what we'd both already suspected. They weren't insurance forms at all. They were a durable power of attorney, handing Renee full legal say over my finances, my medical decisions, and my home. I never signed that paper, and I never will. But finding it changed something in me for good. I wasn't just a lonely old man being talked about behind closed doors anymore. I was a man whose own daughter had tried to trick him into signing away his own life over a stack of papers, dressed up to look boring and routine. Priscilla helped me understand exactly where I stood, and she recommended a realtor she trusted with her eyes closed, a steady young man named Marcus DeLeon, no relation whatsoever to Renee's friend Cheryl, who worked out of an office over in Beaver Creek, with a reputation for moving property fast and quiet when a client needed discretion. I met Marcus at a diner 15 minutes from the house, paid cash for both our coffees, and told him plainly that I wanted to sell my property without my daughter or her husband finding out anything about it until it was already signed, sealed, and done. Marcus didn't ask me why. He just nodded like he'd heard some version of this story before, more than once, and told me the market out past Millbrook was hot enough that 3 acres with a barn and a 4-bedroom farmhouse could realistically bring close to 800,000 if we moved before the weather turned. I opened a fresh account at a credit union across the county line that neither of them knew existed, had my mail rerouted to a post office box, and started meeting Marcus every Thursday afternoon while Renee and Douglas thought I was at physical therapy for my hip. For the first time in months, I felt like the one holding the cards at my own table again. And I can't rightly describe to you how good that felt. To keep Renee and Douglas calm and unsuspecting, I did something that still puts a small smile on my face even now. I let them drive me out to tour Cedar Manor on a Saturday. I walked those hallways with the soft lighting and the smell of lemon polish, nodded along at the activities calendar pinned up by the front desk, even told the woman giving the tour that the dining room had a real nice view of the courtyard, all while knowing full well I had no intention on this green earth of ever living there. Douglas looked so pleased in the truck afterward, telling Renee on speakerphone that Dad seemed genuinely open to the idea, that I nearly felt sorry for the both of them. Nearly. Meanwhile, Marcus DeLeon had quietly listed my property through a private network of buyers that never touched the big websites Renee or Douglas might happen across scrolling on the couch, marketed only through word of mouth to serious, ready buyers. Within 11 days, we had 2 solid offers. The strongest came from a young couple named Trevor and Angela Ferris, expecting their second child, who fell hard for the old barn where I used to let Renee help me sand furniture on Saturday mornings when she was small. Their offer landed at $780,000, cash, flexible on closing, no contingencies, precisely the clean, fast deal Priscilla had told me to hold out for. I sat in Marcus's office and signed that purchase agreement with a hand steadier than I expected, thinking about my daughter's voice drifting off that back porch saying, "He won't even notice," like it was the simplest thing in the world. Well, Renee, I remember thinking as I signed my name across that last page, somebody sure is going to notice. Just isn't going to be me who gets surprised by it. About 2 weeks after I signed, Renee came home from work, practically glowing, the way she used to when she was little, and made the honor roll. Douglas's company was sending the two of them on a 7-day cruise out of Florida, all paid for through some work incentive program, and Renee was already talking about the excursions they'd booked in Cozumel. "It's actually good timing, Dad," she told me over supper, not knowing exactly how right she was. "While we're gone, maybe think some more on Cedar Manor. Could even put a deposit down before we're back. Get things moving." I told her I'd think it over. Same easy voice I'd been carrying for weeks now, and inside my head, I was running the numbers. Marcus and Priscilla had already worked it out that closing could happen in as little as 10 days once both sides signed off, and the Ferrises, eager and already pre-qualified with their bank, were ready to move the second I gave the word. Renee and Douglas left for the airport that Sunday morning, suitcases stacked by the door, Renee reminding me twice to water her African violets on the windowsill while they were away. I stood on the porch and waved as Douglas backed the car down the same gravel drive Renee used to ride her bike down as a girl, and the moment that car turned onto Route 9 and disappeared behind the tree line, I called Marcus DeLeon and told him one simple thing. Move the closing up. Let's get it done this week while they're gone, before they ever get the chance to come home and try to put a stop to what's already in motion. The closing happened that Thursday, 3 days into their cruise. In a small back office at the title company off Main Street, Trevor and Angela Ferris sat across the table from me, Angela's hand resting on her belly, both of them near bursting with excitement over raising their kids on that same land where I'd once taught my own daughter to whittle a slingshot. Tracks. I signed page after page, feeling lighter with every stroke of the pen. And when it was finally finished, Marcus handed me a check for $780,000, minus fees. More money than I had ever held in my hands in 68 years of living. I'd already found my own place by then, a bright little independent living cottage at a community called Sycamore Landing, 20 minutes north in Yellow Springs, with a view of the creek out the back window and a workshop out back where I could still tinker with wood whenever the mood struck me. Nobody picked it out for me off some glossy pamphlet. I chose it myself, walked it myself, paid for it in cash myself, and signed my own name on my own lease. I spent that Thursday afternoon and all of Friday with 2 movers I'd quietly hired weeks ahead, packing up 36 years of a life. Loretta's good china, my father's old hand plane, the photographs off the hallway wall, everything that actually mattered, and left the rest for the new owners, who were tickled to buy the furniture off me for a fair price rather than see it hauled to the curb. By Friday evening, the house on Cedar Hollow Road belonged, plain and simple, to Trevor and Angela Ferris. The locks had already been swapped out by a locksmith Marcus arranged, and I was sitting in my new living room in Yellow Springs, watching the sun drop behind the tree line with a cup of coffee warming my hands, feeling more peace settle into my chest than I had in over a year, maybe longer than that. Before I left Cedar Hollow for the last time, I sat down at the kitchen table where Loretta and I had eaten breakfast together for 34 years, and I wrote one final letter, not to be spiteful, only to be honest. I taped it to the front door right where I knew Renee's key would fail to catch, right at eye level, in an envelope with her name written on it, in the same handwriting I used to sign her report cards. I told her I knew everything. I told her I'd been standing behind that shed on a Tuesday afternoon in October, holding a torque wrench, when I heard her tell somebody on the phone that I wouldn't even notice, and that I heard her talk about the $780,000 like it was already spent and gone. I told her the house had been sold, fair and square, to a good young family who deserved that land far more than 2 people who'd spent the better part of a year scheming how to put their own father out of the way. I told her I wasn't angry anymore, not really, only disappointed in a way that sat heavier than anger ever could, and that, I hoped one day, she understood exactly what it feels like to be the person somebody else decides is simply inconvenient. I told her not to bother trying the old numbers, since I'd already closed those accounts down, but that I'd pick up if she ever called just to say she was sorry, and meant it clean through. I signed it the way I'd signed every birthday card to that girl, since she was 7 years old. Love, Dad. Then I locked that door for the very last time, climbed into my truck, and drove off from Cedar Hollow Road without looking back in the mirror. Not even once. Renee told me later, though I didn't hear it from her own mouth until a couple weeks after, that she and Douglas pulled into the gravel drive that Sunday evening, still sunburned and easy from the cruise. Renee already chattering about her violets and unpacking the suitcases. Douglas walked up to that front door, key in hand, same as he'd done 1,000 times before, and it simply wouldn't turn. He figured the lock was jammed, jiggled it, tried it again, hollered back to Renee that something was wrong. That's when Angela Ferris opened the door from the inside, baby on her hip, confused, asking Douglas who exactly he was and why he was trying to let himself into her house. According to my neighbor Ellis, who watched the whole business unfold from his own porch across the road, Douglas stood frozen on the steps, a long moment before he spotted the envelope taped right beside the doorframe, with Renee's name written across the front. Ellis said Renee read it first, standing there on the front lawn in the fading evening light, and that her hands started shaking somewhere around the third line. He said Douglas took the letter from her when she couldn't finish it, read the rest himself, and that's exactly when Renee dropped straight to her knees on the grass. Ellis told me Douglas just stood there, holding that letter, staring at a house that no longer held one single thing belonging to him, in front of a young family he'd never laid eyes on a road he'd figured he'd own free and clear inside a year. My phone started ringing about 6 minutes later. I didn't answer it, not that night. Renee called me 26 times over the next 3 days. I let every single one roll to voicemail, not out of spite, but because I wanted her to sit with exactly the feeling she'd been so ready and willing to hand me. On the 4th day, sitting on the little back porch of my cottage in Yellow Springs, with the creek running low and gold in the evening light, I finally picked up. Her voice cracked the second I said hello. Dad, please. We didn't mean it the way it sounded. We can fix this. Just tell us where you are. I let her talk a good while, let her work through the apologies and the excuses about money and stress, and how things had just gotten away from the two of them. And when she finally ran out of words, I told her the truth as plain as I could lay it. I told her I'd heard every word of that phone call back in October, that I knew all about the power of attorney dressed up as insurance paperwork, that I'd known exactly what Cedar Manor and $780,000 had meant to her and Douglas for months before I ever breathed a word of it. I told her I wasn't going to holler at her because she was still my daughter and I still loved her plainly and completely. But that loving her didn't mean I owed her a house I'd spent 36 years paying down to the last dollar, especially not after she'd decided on her own that I wouldn't even notice being pushed aside. I told her I was happy, honestly, and truly happy, in a place I'd picked out myself, surrounded by folks my own age who respected my company instead of quietly planning around it. Before I hung up, I told her the door wasn't shut forever. Not completely, but that it would only open back up once she was ready to look at me as her father again, and not as $780,000 standing between her and the life she wanted. I set the phone down on the little table beside my coffee and looked out at that creek running gold in the last of the evening light, feeling, for the first time in longer than I could rightly remember, completely and finally at peace. If you've stayed with me this far, then you already know exactly what it feels like when a quiet man finally decides he's done being quiet.